Hello. So I'm going to read, I think a little bit of a short story, and then I'm maybe going to read a poem. So this is called All the Poems Contained Within Will Mean Everything to Everyone. And it's, I struggle to describe this story, which maybe means I should just start reading it, but I'll read you the blurb. This is the story of one man's dream to edit a groundbreaking contemporary poetry anthology, of how that dream was actually a lot of work, what with reading many bad poems and also incompetent poems, and handwriting rejection letters, and using his wife's family money to pay postage and production costs, all while trying to bounce his newborn son to sleep. It is the story of the epiphanies that come with extreme tiredness, that maybe, just maybe, the greatest poetry book of all is one that contains no poems. So it's kind of inspired by poets' biographies in the backs of poetry anthologies. List of contributors. Adam Laurel, born 1985, is a playwright, translator, and the editor-publisher of this anthology. His work for the stage has been performed at the Rosemary Branch, the Madder Market, and downstairs at the Everyman. In 2012, he was awarded a Society of Authors grant to develop new bilingual work with the Belarus Free Theatre in Minsk. The following year, he was selected by the Sunday Times as one of their 50 creatives who will shape the future. However, nothing in his career so far has meant more to him than this slim volume of poetry. Editing, financing, and producing this publication has been a truly life-changing experience for Adam, changing even the parts of Adam's life that Adam didn't want changed. He hopes you enjoy it. Gabriella Fellman was born in 1996 in Brighton and now lives in Sheffield. Her debut collection of poems, The Trees Ahem, The Trees, will be published this spring. She is the youngest contributor to this project and therefore the most forgivable. Adam Laurel, born 1985, is a playwright, translator, and the editor-publisher of this anthology, and he would just like to add that if you are ever putting together your own landmark generational poetry compendium using a strict open submissions policy, don't give out your home address. Particularly when it's a small top-floor one-bed shared with your then-wife and 4-week-old child. Adam had expected that few poems would arrive, and of those that did, that they would be mostly bad and easily dismissed. How wrong he was, because they came in volume and it was terrifying how passable they were. Hundreds and hundreds of competent poems from men and women, and a few from people who did not give their names because they wanted to be judged on their averageness alone. Utterly, suffocatingly adequate, these poems. Just good enough that he had no choice but to read them closely in order to realise that they were fine. All of which meant that Adam started to prefer really awful poems because at least they made him feel something. Kara Ayet's latest pamphlet is If You Still Believe in Karate. She presumably spent a long time trying to find a way to elegantly write that she won the Talk Talk Fibre Optics New Poets of the Internet Age bursary, perhaps trying it in brackets, abbreviating it as TTFNPAAB before eventually settling for bursary winning. She lives in Salzburg. Adam Laurel is a playwright, translator, and the man who, morning after morning, stood barefoot on his front doorstep holding a bundle of letters so large that the postman left a wide rubber band around them, the kind of bands they use to clamp shut lobsters' claws before they throw them in the pot. And as Adam climbed the 54 steps to his flat, he did sometimes feel bad about all the rejection notes he would have to write. He didn't get into the landmark poetry anthology game in order to crush people's dreams. but it was unavoidable. He made sure to handwrite them and make each slightly different, because that seemed important. I liked these poems, but not enough. I really liked these poems, but not enough. I really liked these poems, but just not quite enough. Peter Daniels' 7th collection, The Animatronic Tyrannosaurus of Guadalajara, is forthcoming with Welt Press. He will not let anyone forget that he edited Unpersoned, a prize-winning book of creative transcriptions of immigration interviews obtained by the Freedom of Information Act, even though it was published nearly 2 decades ago. His poetry has been overlooked for all previous generational anthologies, and it is only thanks to the finely tuned sensibilities of this book's editor that he has finally become one of the chosen. You would expect him to be grateful. Adam Laurel is a playwright, translator, and someone for whom the date Monday, October 14th, 2017 has enormous meaning. Firstly, Adam's son started smiling. It was a big, open-mouthed grin. No teeth, just a view of the soft palate, weird, ridged textures like chewing gum underneath a school desk, and it filled Adam's heart with happiness. Secondly, the first genuinely good poem arrived through the door. The poem was called Fake Lake, and the poet was called Joy Gould, and he had never heard of her or her poem, and he laughed out loud, even though it was a sad poem. He laughed out loud and kissed his still smiling son on his tiny, damp lips. He read the poem to his baby boy, who loved it, and to his then wife, and she, who was not big into poetry, said it did seem good. He Googled the poet's name and found nothing, which was wonderful. I could kiss you, Joy Gould, he told the sky, wherever you are. Adam checked the address on her letter. Aberdeen. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Joy, which meant joy, and Gould, which sounded like Scottish gold. Joy Gould of Aberdeen. And it really lifted him, and him feeling lifted made his then wife happy, and his child was just naturally good-natured. Mary Beaker's violently truncated biographical note was presumably intended to indicate her distrust of this project. Adam Laurel is a playwright and translator who, on reflection, would say that finding one good, nay, great poem set him up for a deeper kind of disappointment, because from that day on he knew that each letter might contain the next fake lake, yet no more fake lakes came. In fact, the majesty and insight and formal innovation of Fake Lake made the rest of the poem seem horrible. He struggled to keep his spirits up as poems that were not Fake Lake filled the flat, piles of unopened letters under the coffee table, the baby changer on the landing. It was a fire risk, his then wife said, and he agreed, so he began to read faster. At this time, his child was only sleeping in his bouncy chair, and so all Adam had to do was sit, open envelopes, read words, 1 foot on the counterweight, boinging his child into oblivion. It should have been bliss. He loved poems. He was sure he did. But time got strange, and Adam did not wash, nor properly sleep, nor drink enough water, nor read a decent stanza for days, until suddenly, while the end of a tropical storm called Craig was having sex with all the trees in the park across the road, the next good poem did arrive, an unforgettably brilliant poem called Europe's Longest Corridor by Niamh O'Donnell, and it moved him deeply, perhaps too deeply. It was suspicious how deeply he was moved, and he gazed at his son, who was so beautiful and so finite, and his then wife came in and read the poem, which didn't seem good to her, and was perhaps even quite bad, she said, she, who did not much like poetry. It goes on in those ways, but I'll stop there. Thank you. So I'm going to read a poem now. Actually, as an accompaniment to that, the publisher asked me if I would try and write Fake Lake by Joy Gould. So there is some, it's actually really hard to write amazing poem anyway. There are now postcards printed with an attempt to write that poem. I'm just going to read this poem and then finish. So thanks for listening. It's called After I Have Written My Important Poem. After I have written my important poem, I will write one about skiing, because where are the decent skiing poems? And some light verse for my friend's brother's civil ceremony, even though I do not much like my friend's brother, but you can't say no to these things. Then a long one about jambes lourdes, heavy legs in French, a condition from which only French people suffer. And though the poem may start as satire, it will slowly attain a terrible empathy. For are we not all girded to every flaw? Etc. The reader suddenly pinned to their seat with compassion for the hypochondriac French, despite the billion euros they waste each year on special creams. And the poem will say, surely if we can understand, I mean truly feel the imagined heft of their legs, then we can love one another, absolutely. Which the reader will buy into, their critical faculties by this point hopelessly diminished, leaving me free to turn the poem's final lines to Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon, released from the limbs that bind us to the earth. Buzz Aldrin, running like how we run in dreams. But first, thank you.